Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming today. I'm joined by Representative Kathy Lomer, Senator Ted Lillie, Senator Paul Gazelka, and Senator Dan Hall. And we have a concept that we'd like to talk with the citizens of Minnesota about. We have just completed the longest shutdown in the history of the state of Minnesota. And this has been a very challenging time for everybody in Minnesota. After weeks of this shutdown, Minnesota is finally back up and operating again at this point. And while we are thrilled that Minnesota is back up and operating, we need to find measures, we need to take measures to ensure that this does not happen again. The cost to Minnesotans, the cost to taxpayers, the cost of services is just too high. The people of Minnesota, state employees, and the services that we rely on have been held hostage by the political process that we have in place and the impasse between the governor and the legislature. This cannot be allowed to happen again. 12 other states have various provisions that allow for a continuous payment of funds and to provide for services and agencies that go forward in the case of an impasse such as the one that we have just experienced. The cost of this shutdown has been that 22,000 state employees have lost their positions, lost their jobs. Construction projects on the roads and on other things have come to a stop. Lottery is closed, costing Minnesota $2.3 million per week. State parks have closed, costing $1 million per week. Veterans outreach programs have ceased. And the private sector has found innumerable cost in the cost of jobs and services that they have been provided and what they have been doing with the state of Minnesota. There also has been a constitutional impasse where we've assigned judges to evaluate what role of government is and how to fund those roles. There are questions about whether that should continue or not, or what should happen in that case. And a lot of these essential services have not been provided. So what we are proposing, and there are a number of different concepts here that we would talk about, but what we are proposing is that we do what 12 other states do, that we make an arrangement that in the event of an impasse between the governor and the legislature, that we continue funding at perhaps the current rate, the prior biennium's level, until there is a new agreement reached. So essential services can continue to be delivered, and that will give the legislature and the governor the time to decide what should those services be. And what we're going to do is we're each going to talk for just a minute here, and then we'll open it up for questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lillie. I'm Senator Paul Gazelka from Brainerd. I think I can sum up most of my comments in 2 words: never again. Minnesota has endured a shutdown that we did not need to endure. It's really not about who's at fault at this point. We're simply pointing to the future and saying we can do better. We all have different ideas, as Senator Lillie talked about. From my perspective, I would like to make it a constitutional amendment. But whether it's an amendment or a statute, we know that we must do something and that we can do something. So never again for Minnesota.
And I'm Ted Lillie, Senator Ted Lillie from Eagan, representing Eagan and a little bit of Burnsville. And like Senator Lillie and Senator Gazelka, my message is pretty simple. No more Minnesota shutdowns. To our small business entrepreneurs, no more Minnesota shutdowns. To our homemakers, to our public workers, no more Minnesota shutdowns. To the racetrack folks, to the people of Rochester, St. Cloud, to the people of Minneapolis, St. Paul, everywhere around the state, no more Minnesota shutdowns. If you look at the state as a brand image, as a brand that we want to market to everyone around the world, this shutdown has caused us to take it on the chin. And this is something we want to prevent in the future. Going forward, we put this legislation in place and we prevent future Minnesota shutdowns. We send the message to the capital markets around the country. We send the message to the capital markets around the world. We send the message to everyone, no more Minnesota shutdowns. We want to restore the confidence in Minnesota so that we've sent out that message to the world that Minnesota is the place that works.
All right, questions?
What happened to the earlier legislation from the Lieutenant Governor?
Yes, there was legislation proposed in 2006 after the prior shutdown. That did not pass, did not become law. I think that what's happened here is that it is time to do something like this. Obviously, the politics have become more diverse, more challenging. We need to find a solution that allows the government to continue its essential services, its core services, to continue to deliver those. And we agree. In fact, the language in our bills is basically the same language that Bretner Solon submitted in 2006. It is time.
Are you concerned that you would take away so much incentive to make a deal, that impasses would go on indefinitely, way into new biennium?
Yes, that is a possibility. That is a probability. At the same time, think about the cost to the citizens of Minnesota. Think about what we have just been through. We need to find a way to do this. Now, there are proposals that it might be at 80% of prior year's funding, it might be at 90%, it might be at 100%, and that's part of the legislative process, and the governor will have a say, of course, in the outcome of that. But we still will have a spirited conversation in that we're not funding it at 120%, at the projected growth rates that have happened in government over the last number of bienniums. So by doing it at 100% or doing it at some number, we'll still have those conversations, we'll still fight those fights, but at the same time, the citizens of Minnesota will not be impacted the way that they are.
To follow up on that, is that an incentive for people who do not want to spend more to not agree?
Well, Pat, if we do this, let's just say it's at 100% of the current biennium. That's just continuing what we're doing. It's the same thing that it works in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has basically the same law. So let's just let government continue to serve, continue to do its services. But I don't see it as an incentive to not negotiate. I see this as an opportunity to make sure that those core services continue to be delivered, and that we will continue to debate on those areas that we need to.
Have you conferred with the governor or the DFL? Any feedback?
We have not conferred at this point with others on this. This is very early in the process. I have had a conversation with Chairman Mike Perry of the state government, and that would be the first stop of this. And our thoughts are that we would probably start hearings very soon. These would not be, we would not be able to vote on this, but let's start getting public feedback on this right away while it's fresh in everybody's mind. And let's make sure that the public has some input into this, and that, of course, Pat, does include the Democrats and all of us.
And along those lines, is there, I haven't seen the language, but is there a deadline here, or is it just indefinite?
Well,
No shutdown?
what would happen, and this is the Lieutenant Governor's language, but what would happen is that basically it would continue at its current funding level until a new agreement is in place, and in the event that some of those services are sunsetted, they would continue to sunset. So this does not stop any of those sunsets that are currently in place.
If I may, when we're considering the alternatives, a state government shutdown or this impasse that Lori and Pat are talking about, which is more severe? Which is more in the best interest of the state of Minnesota, of the citizens, of our businesses, private sector, public sector, all these different folks that have just suffered? It's fresh on their mind. They know how devastating a state government shutdown is. So while there could be parties that aren't as motivated to have a deal, funding the government at the same level as the current biennium is a much better solution than what we just went through.
But isn't funding the government at the current level, wouldn't that be a problem in this very situation, since the state would be $5 billion in the hole and sending out checks that they wouldn't be able to cash at some point?
Well, keep in mind that we had $4 billion more than we had the fire budget
State
level.
law said the state was going to be $5 billion less. Appropriations were supposed to be paid back. If there wasn't a budget agreement, $5 billion would be going out more in terms of LGA payments, school payments. How does this address what the problem would be if there was a major deficit like this time?
Yeah, and first of all, it does encourage fiscal responsibility. But if you're saying that it would be better for state parks to close, for no permits to be given to anybody, for fishing licenses not to be given to people, for road construction
I'm
to
not saying that.
stop.
What I'm saying is that the way that the state's obligations are is that payments would be going out the door, and how would this solve that problem?
In all of the proposals that we have, that we're working on right now, all of them continue funding, mine and Senator Lillie's for sure at 100% of the present budget until we can find agreement. The fact of the matter is we have to find an agreement, but this gives us time to work through that process while there's an impasse, rather than have shutdown at whatever magnitude. We have the government running and the people of Minnesota not enduring the shutdown.
It also addresses the constitutional challenge that with the executive branch and the judicial branch making all of those decisions, which should be by and are constitutionally in the realm of the legislative branch to make those appropriations. So that's another really important aspect of this.
One more aspect of that is, honestly, we're trying to take the politics out of this. There have been too much politics involved in this whole process. Let's take the politics out of this as much as we possibly can. We're not trying to blame the governor. We're not trying to blame anybody here. We're just saying the people of Minnesota deserve a system that works. They deserve a government that works. So let's allow the system to continue. The funding that we had in May probably is enough funding to continue in June, July, August, and September, and certainly is a much better situation than the shutdown that we've currently endured.
So have you finished drafting this yet?
Yes. Well,
Can we get a copy of it?
yes, we will be handing out copies after the meeting. It's actually a very simple, it's just a few lines. And it is the same one that the Lieutenant Governor had previously. And again, there are multiple concepts, funding at 80%, 90%, 100%, constitutional amendment. So there is the ability to talk about this and find what is the best way to serve the people of Minnesota. But the bottom line is that we want to make sure that we don't have another shutdown similar to the one that we've currently gone through. Other states, 12 other states have found a solution. Let's look at those states and how they operate there, and let's find a way to make that work in Minnesota.
Have you talked to lawmakers in some of those 12 states and seen how it's functioned there, and what's their feedback been like?
Yes. I had a meeting last week with Governor Walker in Wisconsin. We were talking about reciprocation in between the states. Senator Sheila Harsdorf was there also. In fact, Governor Walker kind of joked about it. He was asked the question, what do you think about what's happening in Minnesota, and why aren't we getting this in Wisconsin? And his basic comment was that we have a law that says this will never happen. This will not happen. And he was not happy with what's happening here, and he would hope that we could solve the issue more easily, more readily than we have.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.